This video is meant to serve as a quick reference for those who have an inquiry about my stance on consent and how it relates to the human diet. Rights, autonomy, and consent are all closely interrelated. I will touch on all of these in this video. There is a lot to unpack, so this is not the kind of video from which you can take almost anything away unless you're actually actively watching it and pausing to read what's on the screen. Just a fair warning for those who prefer to listen instead of watch. Let's begin with rights. I'll start by listing relevant ideas that act as the foundation of this thought process. First, I understand that things exist and they don't have to justify their existence. There is no real path towards establishing a requirement of a justification for the acquisition of nutrition foundationally. The reasoning for this is laid out on the screen. Now I'll give my thoughts on rights specifically. Rights are only relevant in the context of maintaining a society. They are subjective and are not inherent. Rights are simply promises people make to other people. They are things that we can also grant to other living creatures to be sure, but how they are granted and distributed is generally subject to change. One way humans try to continue to exist is through the building of culture and society. As a human who is not self-sufficient, my survival is dependent on my participation in society, and so the maintenance of society is of utmost importance. That being said, my participation in society is conditional. For myself, as a participant in society, there are two things I ask of people and that I owe people. First, people who are capable ought to be putting things in if they expect to take, are taking, and want to continue to take things out without reasonable expectation of unrest. Please pause and read if you would like further elaboration. Point 2. Those who are capable of putting things in ought not be prevented from taking things out unless they are guilty of or promote the same. Continuing on, it should go without saying at this point that fairness and reciprocation are key for a functioning society. If I were to lose the promise of the aforementioned things, it would rightfully lead me to reevaluate my participation in society. It is only so long as these things are being upheld that I continue to act as I do in society. We can stop here and start to flesh out some ideas. Another kind of person may think that rights are inherent or that any given human life is a valuable life. I reserve the ability to reevaluate the rights I afford to people under the law or under a promise of what I can receive via my participation in society if that starts to become threatened. So, for example, as a Black person, if white supremacists started to bring some stuff back, then I would understand that there are people who are no longer willing to participate in society, and it now becomes me as a wild animal against them as a wild animal. This is keeping in mind that one of my prerequisites for participation in society is that people are not trying to stop other people from enjoying what they themselves enjoy in society. I suppose for vegans, when it comes to their bubble, they prioritize animals much more closely to them, and so they afford them greater rights or special rights above other types of living creatures, including themselves or even humans in general. If that's what they want to do, then they will do that. People can't really dictate to other people what their priorities are. What do I mean by that? Well, now we can start to touch on autonomy. Autonomy is something that's fundamentally understood in what I mentioned before, that a living thing that exists does not need to answer for its own existence. It is an autonomous being and it will continue to exercise whatever it is capable of doing in order to preserve itself, and it doesn't have to answer for that. To say that it doesn't have to answer for it, it's more apt to say that there isn't anything or anyone that it answers to. It's just a given that this is the default. Maintaining autonomy is also important for making sure society runs smoothly, so it can be part of this conversation. One of those ways is through allowing people to do the things that they want to do, so long as they aren't stopping other people from engaging in the same. So, on one hand, we have people who do want to live, but on the other, if there are some people who don't want to live, those people should be facilitated in that. It's something that's difficult for many humans to comprehend, but I'm going to have to ask you to put on your big girl panties or your big boy drawers and try your best to prevent your emotions from getting in the way here. I'm not saying that we shouldn't try to stop people or help people, but my point is that ultimately it is their decision. If we truly want to uphold autonomy, this is also a given. Just like with any other major decision, it's important that we help people through it responsibly. If a person is unwilling to accept help, and if the person has expressed understanding of the consequences of their actions, regardless if other people will be harmed by their absence, if we say autonomy ought to be upheld, that is the ultimate decision a person can make regarding themselves. They don't owe it to anyone to continue to exist. Now, with vegans, again, they place a special priority on animals. I don't, and couldn't even if I wanted to, tell them where to place their priorities. This placement is an incredibly arbitrary thing. I think to prioritize oneself is a given, but it's not as though that's something that can't be changed. People decide to fight for their country and go to war on their own accord. People decide to jump on bombs or push children out of the way and put themselves in danger of a moving vehicle. They can freely make these decisions. If they are willing to sacrifice themselves for an animal, then the animal is at the center of their priorities, and that's just how it is. People have the ability to prioritize whichever kind of life they want to prioritize. The problem comes in where we start to try to force things onto people that violates their autonomy, and that also violates their ability to take out what is reasonable for them to be able to take out as a participant in society. One of these things is food. The same as I expect a vegan to never be able to have the right to tell me what to eat, I will never expect to have the right or try to exact the right over a vegan to tell them what they have to eat. If a vegan decides they don't want to consume animal products, they are well within their right, and this is the perfect exercise of their freedom to make decisions for themselves, their autonomy, even at the risk of their own health. However, we have to keep in mind what was mentioned in the very beginning, and that is that the living creature does not have to ask to eat. Even more so, a living creature cannot decide what is best for it to eat in order to facilitate thriving. Nature, quote unquote, decides that. So the idea that we have to justify the consumption of food generally is laughable. Even more so when it comes to the most healthful, natural food a human has available to it. I guess for vegans, they want to limit people and tell them what kind of food they ought to have, which I'm still trying to figure out where this right ever came from. Where I take the greatest amount of umbrage is that it's widely understood that a vegan diet is not sustainable without the use of emergency medical intervention. A vegan diet is also not something that has been scientifically proven to be effective at sustaining any individual life from before birth to death on Earth, nor the sustainment of humans as a species. It is something that is theoretically possible with the application of supplementation. Basically, it's an experiment. Experiments are not things we should be forcing each other to do. I will go so far as to say no one really has the right to force anyone to do any kind of experiment. We can ask people, but that's not the same thing. And that brings us now to the idea of consent. Consent is something that an autonomous being exercises in order to protect its own best interests. Obviously, for a living creature, the most important thing is to keep surviving, assuming this to be the thing that autonomous creature has chosen to do, or is naturally driven to do in the event that it cannot make such decisions. As participants in society, we have a vested interest in doing the things that help people survive, but ultimately, we can't force them to do the things that could help them survive. For example, we can't force them to procreate, and we can't force them to eat properly. My proximity to animals is that they're one of the furthest rungs leading out from me as a center of what I prioritize. It isn't as though they don't matter at all, and it isn't as though I don't grant rights to them, or that I think we shouldn't. It also isn't that I think they don't have autonomy. As mentioned before, all animals have this, or that ideas related to consent don't apply to them. They absolutely do. However, fundamentally, they are human food. They have the nutrition that humans require. In the correct form, humans require it. They have been the key to human survival thus far, barring evidence, which I cannot live long enough to see through to any reasonable level of satisfaction, of generations of humans surviving and thriving on purely vegan diets. I have no reason to believe otherwise. Even vegetarian people's bodies can find something protective somewhere in the small amount of real nutrition they manage to allow themselves to have. Assuming a person isn't poisoning themselves with carbohydrates on a regular basis, that they have sufficient fat and protein in their diet to sustain their life, and there aren't any unavoidable circumstances, genetics, allergies, etc., that they are held back by, there should be no expectation that they require much more beyond what can be found in the animal kingdom. While I tried to make this as thorough as I could, I perfectly understand that there are people who disagree with me on something I've said here. For example, a person might have different items on the list of the fundamental things that they require for their participation in society. Good for them. They can want what they want, and I will continue to want what I want. I can't tell them what to be motivated by, and they can't tell me what to be motivated by. I mean, I guess we could try to do it, but it would be to no avail. If there is a conversation to be had here, perhaps we can have it, but please understand that my basic understanding of rights, autonomy, and consent are not my opinion. I'm talking descriptively about them. It's not about what I want, unless I specifically stated as such. I start with the foundational understanding of how things are, and the rest is how I've chosen to try to survive on planet Earth, keeping those fundamental things about life in mind. The way that you choose to live your life is well within your ability to exercise as an autonomous being. Trying to get me to prioritize animals over myself would be as fruitless as me trying to get you to prioritize yourself over animals. It's also incredibly patronizing to do so, but perhaps you're a patronizing human being, in which case, try, but just have the reasonable expectation that you'll be wasting your own time. If you get off on that kind of thing, then have at you. One major part of my thought process hinges on animals being proper human food. Again, if what was true for animals was true for vegetables, and we could rest assured that plants could sustain human life for generations and also facilitate proper mental and physical health, we wouldn't be having this conversation. If it turned out that meat was subpar and didn't help me achieve these things, I also wouldn't be saying these things so strongly. But if one person's anecdote for a vegan diet working very well for them is their justification, then equally so is my anecdote of having a heavily animal-based diet working for me. And again, we're two people at an impasse. The kind of world I want to build is a kind of world in which, even though I think what vegans are doing is really self-destructive and stupid, they still have the ability to do it. It means that even though I think they are suicidal morons, I have an obligation as a member of society to make sure that they can take what they want out of society as a participant in society. This, of course, is only so long as I'm able to do the same. On a final note, I do have an obligation to help people when I think that they're not making the best decision depending on the situation. And in most situations, the best decision is one that is an informed decision. I think that's the bare minimum that we can do for each other in society, while still allowing each other to make the ultimate choices for ourselves. We should be concerned with safely navigating people through their self-destructive choices. And so educating people is key. Lying to them, manipulating them, or misleading them is immoral behavior, and I will call it out as I see it. But more on morals in another video. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, be having a good day.